Hey guys, tonight imagine this. You wake before sunrise on a cold spring morning in 1874. The room around you is quiet except for the occasional rattle of wagon wheels somewhere beyond the window. Your breakfast is yesterday's bread, your savings would barely cover another month of rent, and on the small wooden table rests a folded newspaper carrying an opportunity that feels almost unbelievable. It isn't a job advertisement. It isn't news from Washington. It's a stranger asking for a wife. Today, that sounds impossible. In the 19th century, it was a genuine solution to a very real problem. Thousands of men had crossed America's expanding frontier in search of land, gold, timber, cattle, and opportunity. What many of them failed to find was companionship. Entire towns appeared almost overnight, filled with miners, ranchers, railroad workers, blacksmiths, and farmers, but very few women. Back east, meanwhile, many women faced a different reality. Factory work paid little. Domestic service meant endless hours for modest wages. Some supported aging parents. Others had been widowed. Many simply saw no realistic path toward owning property or building financial security. Somewhere between those two worlds, newspapers created an unusual bridge. Tonight, we're exploring how ordinary people placed extraordinary trust in ink, paper, and complete strangers. This isn't the romantic version popularized in novels. This is the complicated, practical, sometimes hopeful, and sometimes heartbreaking reality behind America's mail-order marriages. To understand why anyone would make such a decision, we first have to leave behind modern assumptions. Marriage wasn't simply about romance. For much of the 19th century, it was also an economic partnership. A farm needed workers. A household needed organization. Children needed care. Livestock demanded attention every single day regardless of weather, illness, or exhaustion. Running a frontier homestead required two adults far more often than it required grand declarations of love. Love, many believed, could grow later. Survival could not wait. Now imagine you're 24 years old. You've spent 6 years working in a textile mill. Every morning begins before daylight. Every evening ends after sunset. The machines are loud enough to drown conversation. Cotton dust settles into your lungs. The wages barely cover food and rent. Promotion isn't likely. Property ownership is almost unimaginable. One Sunday afternoon you notice a short advertisement tucked between notices for livestock auctions and land sales. A respectable farmer seeks a practical woman willing to establish a home in Nebraska. No flowery language. No poetry. Just a proposal written in fewer than 50 words. You read it once. Then again. Then perhaps several more times over the following week. Could someone really leave everything behind for a person they had never met? Surprisingly often, the answer was yes. The United States after the Civil War was changing at astonishing speed. Railroads stretched farther west every year. Entire communities appeared where open prairie had stood only months before. The federal government encouraged settlement through land policies that rewarded those willing to farm difficult territory. For single men, obtaining land was often easier than building a family. A successful homestead required more than fences and fields. It required people. Many Western newspapers openly admitted that communities needed women if they hoped to survive beyond a generation. Schools needed children. Churches needed families. Businesses depended on permanent residents rather than temporary workers chasing the next gold strike. As a result, local leaders sometimes encouraged correspondence between Eastern women and Western settlers. Not every effort succeeded. Some failed spectacularly. Others quietly produced lasting marriages that stretched across decades. But before any wedding came something far less dramatic. A letter. Not a text message. Not a photograph instantly shared across continents. Just several carefully written pages traveling hundreds or even thousands of miles by train, horseback, riverboat, or stagecoach. Weeks passed before replies arrived. Sometimes months. Silence itself became an answer. Every sentence mattered because changing your mind after arrival could prove nearly impossible. Imagine trying to summarize your entire personality on 2 sheets of paper. You cannot erase mistakes. Ink remains where it lands. You choose your words carefully. You describe your work. Perhaps you mention your church. Maybe you explain that you've managed a household since your mother's illness. You avoid sounding desperate. You avoid sounding proud. You hope honesty is enough. Meanwhile, somewhere beyond endless grasslands, another person sits beneath lamplight attempting exactly the same thing. He describes his farm, his livestock, his cabin, his hopes for the future. Naturally, each writer emphasizes strengths. Few advertisements began with, "My roof leaks whenever it rains." No one proudly announced, "Winters regularly destroy my fences." Reality usually arrived later. Sometimes immediately after stepping off the train. The frontier possessed a remarkable ability to humble expectations. Many Eastern newspapers painted Western life as an exciting adventure filled with opportunity. The truth depended heavily upon geography. Kansas differed from Montana. Colorado differed from Dakota Territory. Some settlements flourished. Others disappeared almost as quickly as they appeared. A glowing description in print rarely captured relentless wind, isolation, drought, insects, or months without seeing another family. Letters often softened those details. Not necessarily through outright lies. More often through careful omission. Human nature has always preferred presenting the best version of itself. That hasn't changed very much. Picture arriving after weeks of travel. Instead of neat white fences, you discover a rough cabin standing alone against miles of open prairie. Instead of thriving orchards, endless grass. Instead of nearby neighbors, perhaps one family living several miles away. For someone raised in Boston, Philadelphia, or New York, such isolation could feel almost unimaginable. Night brought silence unlike anything experienced in eastern cities. No factories. No horse traffic. Sometimes only wind. Sometimes coyotes somewhere beyond the darkness. For some newcomers, that silence represented peace. For others, loneliness. The adjustment demanded resilience rarely captured inside newspaper advertisements. Yet many persevered. One reason was necessity. Returning home required money few possessed. Another was determination. Settlers had already accepted enormous risks merely reaching the frontier. Building a life despite hardship often seemed preferable to admitting defeat. Gradually routines formed. Gardens appeared. Schools opened. Church bells rang across communities that months earlier had existed only on survey maps. Children were born. Roads improved. Towns gained permanence. Behind those developments stood countless ordinary families whose stories never entered history books. Their names rarely became famous. Their labor shaped entire regions. Modern discussions sometimes treat mail-order marriages as unusual curiosities. In reality, they reflected larger social forces. Population imbalance. Economic opportunity. Transportation improvements. Newspaper expansion. Postal networks. Each played a role. Without reliable mail service, none of these relationships could have developed. The humble envelope became one of the most powerful technologies of its era. The morning train leaves the station wrapped in coal smoke. Passengers crowd into wooden coaches carrying carpetbags, crates, blankets, and hopes that weigh far more than anything stored in the luggage rack overhead. Some travel only a few counties away. Others intend never to return. In the decades after the American Civil War, movement became part of everyday life. Entire families packed their possessions onto wagons or boarded trains heading toward places they had only seen on maps. The frontier wasn't a single line advancing westward, it was thousands of individual decisions made around kitchen tables, church steps, and railroad platforms. For many settlers, the journey began long before they ever stepped onto a train. It began with an idea. A rumor that land was available. A cousin's letter describing rich soil. A newspaper article celebrating a newly founded town. Or perhaps a conversation with someone who claimed that opportunity waited just beyond the horizon. Some stories were true. Others became much larger in the retelling. Land companies advertised fertile farmland that looked almost effortless to cultivate. Railroad firms printed colorful brochures encouraging immigration. Local newspapers proudly described communities that hoped to attract merchants, teachers, doctors, blacksmiths, and farmers. Optimism became one of the frontier's most valuable exports. Reality, however, remained stubbornly tied to geography. The Great Plains could reward patience with abundant harvests. They could also punish inexperience with drought, hailstorms, grasshopper swarms, or brutal winters. A single growing season might determine whether a family prospered or struggled for years. Success depended on knowledge as much as determination. New arrivals learned quickly that prairie grass did not behave like eastern farmland. Trees were scarce in many regions. Building materials sometimes traveled hundreds of miles. Water could be plentiful in one county and frustratingly distant in the next. Every settlement possessed its own challenges. Still, people kept coming. Railroad construction accelerated migration by shrinking distances that once required exhausting wagon journeys. What had previously taken months could often be completed in weeks. With every new rail line came new towns. Some survived. Others faded almost immediately. A settlement might spring to life after a railroad survey, only to disappear if the tracks ultimately followed another route. Empty foundations and abandoned storefronts reminded travelers that optimism alone could not guarantee success. Population imbalances became increasingly obvious. Mining camps often consisted overwhelmingly of young men. Logging communities looked similar. Large ranches employed cowboys, laborers, cooks, and teamsters, but relatively few families. Community leaders understood that lasting prosperity required more than profitable businesses. It required schools, churches, shops, children, stable households. Without families, many settlements remained temporary. This imbalance created unusual opportunities and equally unusual risks. Some churches organized introductions between Eastern congregations and Western communities. Relatives exchanged letters suggesting possible matches. Friends recommended acquaintances. Newspapers eventually joined this growing network of correspondence. Each method reflected the same basic reality. Distance no longer prevented communication, but it still demanded patience. Every letter represented weeks of waiting. Imagine posting a question today and receiving the answer 2 months later. That was perfectly ordinary in the 19th century. During those long weeks, imagination filled the silence. A simple sentence might be interpreted dozens of different ways. A delayed reply could indicate illness, bad weather, lost mail, or simply the slow pace of transportation. Nobody knew until another envelope finally arrived. This uncertainty shaped relationships from the very beginning. Conversations unfolded across seasons rather than hours. Thoughtful writing mattered because opportunities to correct misunderstandings arrived slowly. People revised drafts carefully before committing words to paper. Paper itself carried value. Ink cost money. Postage cost money. Every page represented an investment. The slower rhythm encouraged reflection. It also encouraged selective storytelling. Writers naturally emphasized encouraging details. A farmer described productive fields but perhaps neglected to mention that locusts had devastated neighboring counties only a year earlier. An Eastern correspondent discussed domestic skills while saying little about financial hardship. Neither necessarily intended deception. Both hoped to present their strongest qualities. That instinct remains familiar today. The frontier also attracted immigrants from around the world. German, Swedish, Norwegian, Irish, Czech, Danish, and many other communities established farms across the expanding American West. Letters crossed oceans as well as states. For some newcomers, America represented another beginning after political upheaval, poverty, or limited opportunity in Europe. Communities often formed around shared languages and traditions, helping recent arrivals adjust to unfamiliar surroundings. Churches served as gathering places. Local festivals preserved customs brought from distant homelands. Recipes, songs, and family traditions traveled surprisingly well across continents. Even so, adapting required enormous resilience. Climate differed. Agriculture differed. Neighbors came from backgrounds that might have been completely unfamiliar. Communication sometimes demanded learning an entirely new language. Yet cooperation frequently proved essential. When a barn needed raising, nearby families helped regardless of accent. When illness struck, neighbors often became the closest source of assistance. Isolation encouraged practical generosity. The frontier rewarded people who understood that survival rarely happened alone. This spirit extended beyond physical labor. Letters circulated constantly. Families exchanged news. Merchants placed orders. Teachers requested supplies. Children practiced handwriting by corresponding with relatives hundreds of miles away. The postal service quietly connected communities scattered across enormous distances. Without those dependable routes, settlement would have progressed far more slowly. Every mailbag carried business contracts, personal hopes, heartbreaking news, and ordinary conversations that stitched together a growing nation. Among those countless envelopes were letters introducing strangers who wondered whether friendship, or perhaps marriage, might develop through careful correspondence. Some exchanges ended after only 1 or 2 letters. Others continued for months. A few eventually changed 2 lives forever. Not because destiny demanded it. Because 2 people decided that uncertainty was worth facing together. By the time the morning edition reached the streets, the newsroom had already been awake for hours. Printers moved with practiced speed between heavy iron presses. Compositors arranged tiny metal letters into neat columns, 1 piece at a time. Editors hurried from desk to desk carrying handwritten notes, correcting spelling, trimming unnecessary words, and deciding what would, and would not, appear before thousands of readers. Every inch of a newspaper mattered. Space was expensive. Ink cost money. Paper cost money. If someone wanted to place an advertisement, every extra line increased the price. That simple fact shaped the way people described themselves. A lifetime had to fit inside a handful of sentences. Farmer, 32, owns productive land. Widow with household experience. Carpenter seeking respectable companion. Each notice was remarkably brief, but behind every line stood a person with a complicated history that could never fit inside a newspaper column. Editors understood this better than anyone. Their responsibility extended beyond printing political speeches and market prices. They organized public notices, shipping schedules, employment advertisements, property sales, missing persons, and, increasingly, personal correspondence. Some newspapers accepted matrimonial advertisements as simply another category of classified notice. Others debated whether they should print them at all. Critics worried that strangers could not possibly judge one another through letters alone. Supporters argued that arranged introductions had existed for generations. Newspapers merely expanded the circle beyond family and neighbors. Both sides raised reasonable points. The truth, as usual, proved more complicated. Not every editor approached these advertisements in the same way. Some insisted on polite language and rejected notices that seemed dishonest or insulting. Others accepted nearly anything provided the fee had been paid. The quality of the publication often depended on the judgment of the people running it. Readers learned which newspapers enjoyed good reputations and which ones promised more than they could deliver. Trust became valuable. Without it, subscribers simply stopped writing. Imagine entering a newspaper office in 1876. The building smells faintly of ink, paper, lamp oil, and fresh timber. Stacks of newspapers occupy one corner. Bundles of incoming letters fill another. The editor begins sorting the morning mail. Business inquiries. Subscription renewals. Local announcements. Personal advertisements. Letters addressed only by advertisement numbers. Some envelopes contain carefully folded photographs. Others include references from ministers, employers, or respected members of the community. Everything must be organized. Everything must reach the correct recipient. It is slow work requiring patience and attention. One misplaced envelope could end a correspondence before it truly began. Despite these challenges, the postal system improved steadily throughout the 19th century. Railroads accelerated delivery. Stagecoaches connected smaller settlements. Riverboats carried sacks of mail through regions where roads remained unreliable. Every improvement made long-distance communication a little more dependable. Even so, delays remained common. Heavy snow might halt travel. Flooded rivers could interrupt transportation. Mechanical failures occasionally stranded trains for days. Correspondence required flexibility. People learned not to panic when a letter arrived late. Sometimes the explanation proved entirely ordinary. Waiting became part of the process. Modern readers often imagine dramatic love letters filled with elaborate declarations. Many surviving examples tell a different story. They discuss weather, harvests, church attendance, prices for flour, the condition of livestock, repairs to a fence, health, family news. These practical details mattered because they revealed character more effectively than grand speeches. A person who consistently wrote with kindness, honesty, and patience often inspired confidence over time. Trust developed gradually. That slow pace discouraged impulsive decisions. Months of correspondence allowed both sides to observe how another person communicated through changing seasons and changing circumstances. Did they remain courteous after disappointment? Did they answer difficult questions? Did their stories remain consistent? These small observations often mattered far more than appearance alone. Photographs, when exchanged, remained relatively uncommon and expensive compared with today's endless stream of images. A single studio portrait represented an occasion. People selected their finest clothing. Photographers carefully arranged posture and lighting. Long exposure times required remarkable stillness. The resulting image captured only one carefully prepared moment. It could never fully reveal someone's personality. Letters still carried most of the burden. Editors occasionally noticed patterns developing across hundreds of submissions. Loneliness sounded remarkably similar whether it came from a ranch in Wyoming or a boarding house in Philadelphia. Hope sounded similar too. People wanted stability, respect, partnership, a chance to build something lasting. Their circumstances differed, but their goals often overlapped. Not every correspondent ultimately married. Some discovered through writing that their expectations simply did not match. Others became friends. A few stopped replying altogether. Silence, while disappointing, also provided an answer. Ending a correspondence before making lifelong commitments often prevented greater unhappiness later. This gradual process encouraged careful decision-making. No one expected certainty. They hoped only for enough confidence to continue writing one more letter. And then another. Sometimes that was enough. As newspapers expanded across the growing nation, they quietly connected people separated by hundreds of miles, individuals who otherwise would never have known the other's name. The printed page became more than a source of news. It became a meeting place. Not a physical one. A place built from ink, patience, and possibility. Before telephones connected homes, before airplanes crossed continents in hours, before messages traveled invisibly through satellites, nearly every important decision in a person's life depended on something remarkably ordinary. A folded sheet of paper. Imagine watching a mailbag being loaded onto a train in the spring of 1877. The leather sack is heavier than it appears. Inside are business contracts, family news, military records, church bulletins, birthday greetings, invoices, and dozens of personal letters written by people who may never meet face to face. Each envelope represents a story still unfolding. One of those letters begins its journey in a busy city. Its writer spent nearly an hour choosing the right words. Another starts in a remote farming settlement where paper is precious and ink even more so. Though written hundreds of miles apart, both letters are now traveling toward unknown futures. The first stage of the trip is often by rail. Railroads had transformed communication across the United States. Only a generation earlier, much of the same journey would have required horses, wagons, or riverboats alone. Now locomotives carried passengers and mail across astonishing distances with a speed previous generations could scarcely imagine. That did not mean the journey was comfortable. Steam engines showered sparks into the air. Coal smoke drifted through open windows. Wooden coaches rattled constantly over uneven track. Delays were expected rather than exceptional. A broken wheel. A damaged bridge. Livestock wandering onto the rails. Any one of these could halt an entire train. Mail simply waited alongside everyone else. When the train reached a larger station, postal workers moved quickly. Canvas sacks were unloaded. New ones replaced them within minutes. Every stop followed a carefully organized routine. Letters heading north were separated from those heading west. Packages changed routes. Schedules were checked. Mistakes had to be caught immediately because correcting them later could cost weeks. For postal clerks, accuracy mattered more than speed. A single misplaced envelope might travel hundreds of unnecessary miles before anyone noticed. From the railroad, some letters continued by stagecoach. Picture a sturdy coach rolling across open country. Its wheels bounce through deep ruts cut by years of wagon traffic. Passengers brace themselves against every jolt. Dust settles over luggage. The driver keeps one eye on the road and another on the weather. Storm clouds gathering on the horizon could change the day's plans entirely. Rain transformed dirt roads into thick mud. Snow buried landmarks. Rivers rose without warning. Travel demanded patience from everyone involved. Sometimes the coach reached a lonely roadside station where fresh horses waited. The exchange happened quickly. Tired animals were unharnessed. Rested teams took their place. Within minutes the coach continued westward, carrying travelers, supplies, and the precious mailbag. Not every destination had a railroad. Not every destination even had a proper road. Some communities depended on horseback riders making regular postal rounds. These carriers knew every creek crossing, every isolated farmhouse, and every family expecting news. They became familiar faces in places where strangers rarely appeared. For many settlers, mail day became the week's most anticipated event. Work often paused briefly. Children watched the road. Adults tried not to appear too eager. Perhaps today there would be a letter from home. Perhaps news from distant relatives. Perhaps a reply that had been awaited for more than a month. Sometimes the carrier arrived carrying exactly what everyone hoped to receive. Sometimes the mailbag held nothing addressed to that household. Disappointment became part of frontier life. Yet hope returned with the next delivery. This rhythm shaped countless relationships. Mistakes had to be caught immediately because correcting them later could cost weeks. For postal clerks, accuracy mattered more than speed. A single misplaced envelope might travel hundreds of unnecessary miles before anyone noticed. From the railroad, some letters continued by stagecoach. Picture a sturdy coach rolling across open country. Its wheels bounce through deep ruts cut by years of wagon traffic. Passengers brace themselves against every jolt. Dust settles over luggage. The driver keeps one eye on the road and another on the weather. Storm clouds gathering on the horizon could change the day's plans entirely. Rain transformed dirt roads into thick mud. Snow buried landmarks. Rivers rose without warning. Travel demanded patience from everyone involved. Sometimes the coach reached a lonely roadside station where fresh horses waited. The exchange happened quickly. Tired animals were unharnessed. Rested teams took their place. Within minutes the coach continued westward, carrying travelers, supplies, and the precious mailbag. Not every destination had a railroad. Not every destination even had a proper road. Some communities depended on horseback riders making regular postal rounds. These carriers knew every creek crossing, every isolated farmhouse, and every family expecting news. They became familiar faces in places where strangers rarely appeared. For many settlers, mail day became the week's most anticipated event. Work often paused briefly. Children watched the road. Adults tried not to appear too eager. Perhaps today there would be a letter from home. Perhaps news from distant relatives. Perhaps a reply that had been awaited for more than a month. Sometimes the carrier arrived carrying exactly what everyone hoped to receive. Sometimes the mailbag held nothing addressed to that household. Disappointment became part of frontier life. Yet hope returned with the next delivery. This rhythm shaped countless relationships. This rhythm shaped countless relationships. Imagine writing a question in April. The answer might not reach you until June. During that time, life continued. Crops needed planting. Roofs needed repair. Illness could appear unexpectedly. Circumstances changed while letters remained somewhere along the route, completely unaware of events unfolding at either end. As a result, many correspondents learned to write with remarkable detail. They anticipated questions before they could be asked. A single letter often contained enough information to sustain an entire conversation across several weeks. Instead of asking, "How have you been?" a writer might describe the weather, family health, church activities, local prices, repairs completed on the house, and plans for the coming season, all before closing the letter. It was practical. It was thoughtful. And it reflected the realities of slow communication. The physical appearance of a letter mattered too. Good handwriting suggested care. Clear organization made reading easier. A neatly folded page hinted at patience and discipline. Although appearances could be misleading, many people formed first impressions from these small details. Ink itself told quiet stories. Heavy, confident strokes differed from hesitant writing. Occasionally a blot of ink interrupted an otherwise careful page. Perhaps the writer paused to think. Perhaps someone bumped the table. Perhaps a child suddenly needed attention. These tiny imperfections reminded readers that another human being had held the same sheet of paper weeks earlier. There was something deeply personal about that connection. Unlike a printed advertisement, every handwritten letter carried individual character. No two looked exactly alike. No machine copied them. Every curve of every letter had been formed by someone's hand. On isolated farms, letters were often read repeatedly. This rhythm shaped countless relationships. Imagine writing a question in April. The answer might not reach you until June. During that time, life continued. Crops needed planting. Roofs needed repair. Illness could appear unexpectedly. Circumstances changed while letters remained somewhere along the route, completely unaware of events unfolding at either end. As a result, many correspondents learned to write with remarkable detail. They anticipated questions before they could be asked. A single letter often contained enough information to sustain an entire conversation across several weeks. Instead of asking, "How have you been?" a writer might describe the weather, family health, church activities, local prices, repairs completed on the house, and plans for the coming season, all before closing the letter. It was practical. It was thoughtful. And it reflected the realities of slow communication. The physical appearance of a letter mattered too. Good handwriting suggested care. Clear organization made reading easier. A neatly folded page hinted at patience and discipline. Although appearances could be misleading, many people formed first impressions from these small details. Ink itself told quiet stories. Heavy, confident strokes differed from hesitant writing. Occasionally a blot of ink interrupted an otherwise careful page. Perhaps the writer paused to think. Perhaps someone bumped the table. Perhaps a child suddenly needed attention. These tiny imperfections reminded readers that another human being had held the same sheet of paper weeks earlier. There was something deeply personal about that connection. Unlike a printed advertisement, every handwritten letter carried individual character. No two looked exactly alike. No machine copied them. Every curve of every letter had been formed by someone's hand. On isolated farms, letters were often read repeatedly. An envelope might remain tucked inside a family Bible or stored carefully in a wooden box. Some people memorized favorite passages. Others shared them aloud with relatives gathered around the evening lamp. The words became companions during long winters and lonely seasons. In many households, preserving correspondence became almost as important as receiving it. Today historians treasure these surviving collections. They reveal ordinary lives in extraordinary detail. Not the speeches of famous politicians. Not the memoirs of wealthy industrialists. Instead, they preserve conversations between teachers, farmers, merchants, soldiers, mothers, fathers, and hopeful strangers trying to understand one another across impossible distances. Their letters remind us that history is built not only by celebrated figures but by millions of ordinary people making careful decisions one page at a time. Some of those decisions ended in disappointment. Others led to lifelong partnerships. None of them happened quickly. Every relationship grew at the speed of the mail. And perhaps that pace encouraged something modern life rarely demands. Patience. Before another letter could be written, one first had to wait. Wait for the train. Wait for the stagecoach. Wait for the weather. Wait for the knock at the door or the familiar sound of hoofbeats announcing the arrival of the mail carrier. The train has long since disappeared. The station is little more than a memory behind you, swallowed by distance and the endless horizon. Before you stretches a landscape unlike anything you have ever known. There are no crowded streets. No church bells echoing through narrow neighborhoods. No rows of brick buildings disappearing around the next corner. Instead, there is sky. An astonishing amount of sky. It seems to begin at your feet and rise forever, interrupted only by gentle waves of prairie grass moving with the wind. For someone raised in the eastern United States, the openness feels both beautiful and unsettling. There is nowhere to hide from the weather, and nowhere for the eye to rest except the distant horizon. Your new home stands a short wagon ride away. It is modest. Much smaller than the comfortable farmhouse you may have imagined while reading letters months ago. The building is sturdy enough, but practical rather than elegant. Every board has been carried, cut, and nailed into place through hard labor. Nothing here exists by accident. Every chair has a purpose. Every shelf has earned its place. Luxury is measured differently on the frontier. A dry roof after a thunderstorm is a luxury. A full pantry before winter is a luxury. A healthy horse is a luxury. Even a reliable well can feel like wealth beyond measure. Inside, the cabin is simple. One large room serves many purposes throughout the day. Meals are prepared over a cast-iron stove. The same table becomes a workbench, a dining room, and, on Sundays, a place for reading scripture or writing letters home. Beds are tucked into corners or separated by simple curtains. Storage space is precious. Nothing unnecessary survives very long. You quickly discover that frontier life follows the seasons with remarkable precision. Spring brings planting. Summer demands constant work. Autumn becomes a race against time. Winter tests every decision made during the previous months. The first winter arrives sooner than expected. The air grows colder each week. Morning frost appears on the windows. Water freezes overnight. The wind changes its voice. It whistles through every small crack in the walls, reminding you that nature is stronger than even the best-built cabin. Keeping warm becomes a full-time responsibility. Wood must be chopped. Fires must be watched. Ashes must be removed. Blankets are layered carefully at night. Every log burned today is one that cannot be burned tomorrow. Fuel is never wasted. Food becomes equally important. Months before the first snowfall, families preserve as much as possible. Vegetables are stored in root cellars. Fruit is dried or turned into preserves. Meat is salted or smoked. Butter is churned. Flour is carefully protected from moisture and pests. Every successful harvest becomes insurance against the uncertain months ahead. A single mistake in food storage can have serious consequences. Mice find their way into sacks of grain. Barrels leak. Unexpected illness delays important work. Nothing can be taken for granted. Weather dictates the rhythm of life more than the clock ever could. Then come the storms. Prairie blizzards are unlike the snowfalls familiar to many eastern cities. Strong winds erase roads completely. Fence posts disappear beneath drifting snow. Landmarks vanish. Travel becomes dangerous within minutes. Families sometimes tie ropes between the house and nearby barns so they can find their way through blinding snow without becoming lost only a few steps from safety. Stories like these may sound dramatic today. To frontier settlers, they were practical lessons learned through experience. The weather demanded respect. Despite the hardships, daily life continues. Animals still require feeding. Water must still be collected. Bread must still be baked. Children continue learning their lessons. Repairs cannot wait simply because temperatures fall below freezing. Work changes with the season, but it never truly stops. One of the greatest challenges for many newcomers is loneliness. In cities, neighbors live only a few doors away. On the prairie, the nearest family might be several miles distant. A simple visit can require hours of travel. Snow or heavy rain may make those visits impossible for weeks. Letters become treasured companions. Each arrival from family back east is read slowly, often more than once. Some people keep every letter they receive. Others tie them together with ribbon and store them carefully in wooden chests. The familiar handwriting offers comfort during long evenings. It reminds settlers that although they live far away, they have not been forgotten. Community, when it exists, becomes extraordinarily valuable. Church gatherings provide more than worship. They offer conversation, news, friendship. Children play together while adults exchange advice about crops, weather, livestock, and upcoming harvests. Barn raisings become opportunities for entire neighborhoods to cooperate. One family alone could rarely complete such a demanding task quickly. Together, dozens of neighbors could raise the frame of a barn in a single day. These gatherings strengthened more than buildings. They strengthened trust. Frontier communities learned that survival depended less on individual strength than on mutual support. No one escaped hardship entirely. Everyone experienced disappointment. Crop failures. Illness. Accidents. Unexpected losses. Yet these same communities also celebrated weddings, births, successful harvests, and small victories that might seem ordinary elsewhere but carried enormous meaning here. As the first winter slowly gives way to spring, something unexpected has happened. The unfamiliar landscape no longer feels quite so foreign. The endless horizon that once seemed intimidating now feels comforting. You know where the creek bends after the cottonwood trees. You recognize the calls of meadowlarks returning with warmer weather. You understand which clouds promise rain and which merely drift overhead. Without realizing it, you have begun to belong. Not because life has become easy. It certainly has not. But because routine has replaced uncertainty. Home, it turns out, is often built gradually rather than discovered all at once. The prairie looks empty from a distance. Stand on a low hill just after sunrise, and the land stretches so far that the horizon seems to disappear into the morning haze. Grass bends with the wind in long silver waves, interrupted only by the occasional cottonwood tree growing beside a narrow stream. If you had passed this place only 5 years earlier, you would have found little evidence that anyone intended to stay. Today, everything has changed. A rough wagon track has become a road. A few cabins have become dozens. Where smoke once rose from a single chimney, it now curls into the morning sky from nearly every direction. A town is beginning. No one announces the moment a settlement becomes a community. There is no ceremony. No ribbon cutting. No official declaration. It happens gradually, one family at a time. A blacksmith builds a forge because farmers need horses shod. A carpenter opens a workshop because someone always needs a door repaired or a new wagon wheel. A merchant fills shelves with flour, coffee, lamp oil, nails, fabric, and tools. Soon another merchant arrives, believing there is enough business for two. Then comes a doctor. A teacher. Perhaps a minister. Each newcomer depends on the others, and before long the settlement develops a rhythm all its own. The first school is rarely impressive. Sometimes classes are held in a single-room cabin with rough benches and a wood stove standing in the middle of the room. Children of many different ages learn together. The youngest practice their alphabet while older students solve arithmetic problems only a few feet away. The teacher has little privacy and few supplies, yet somehow manages to keep order among students whose daily lives are already filled with responsibility. Many children attend school only when farm work allows. Planting season keeps them home. Harvest season keeps them busy. Education competes with survival. Still, families value learning. They understand that reading, writing, and arithmetic may offer opportunities their children never had. Sunday often brings the busiest day of the week. Church services gather people from miles around. Some arrive on horseback. Others travel by wagon. A few walk several miles if the weather is favorable. The church serves many purposes beyond worship. It is a meeting place. A news center. A place where neighbors exchange advice, arrange business, celebrate weddings, and welcome new arrivals. After the service ends, few people hurry home. Conversation continues outside beneath the open sky. Children race across the grass while adults discuss rainfall, livestock prices, and the condition of the roads. Friendships grow naturally because nearly everyone depends on someone else sooner or later. Isolation teaches cooperation. When a family plans to build a new barn, invitations are unnecessary. Neighbors simply appear. Some bring tools. Others bring food. The work begins early. Heavy beams are lifted by dozens of hands working together. Experienced builders guide those with less practice. By evening, the frame stands where only empty ground existed that morning. The celebration afterward is almost as important as the construction itself. Shared work creates lasting trust. In towns like these, reputations matter. A person known for honesty quickly earns respect. Someone who repeatedly breaks promises may find few willing to extend credit or assistance. Without large banks nearby, trust becomes a valuable form of currency. Shopkeepers often allow customers to pay after harvest. Everyone understands that crops determine whether debts can be settled. Some years are generous. Others are not. The local general store becomes the heart of everyday life. Its shelves hold an extraordinary variety of goods. Flour sits beside lantern glass. Coffee shares space with bolts of cloth. Tin cups, seeds, soap, tobacco, buttons, and fishing hooks all compete for room inside the same building. People come to buy supplies. They stay to hear news. The storekeeper often knows which family welcomed a new baby, whose roof needs repair, and which traveler arrived on yesterday's stagecoach. Information spreads faster through conversation than through newspapers. Mail day remains an important event. When the postal carrier arrives, customers gather almost immediately. Letters are handed across the counter one by one. Some recipients smile before opening the envelope because they recognize the handwriting. Others pause for a quiet moment, wondering what news waits inside. Good news and difficult news travel together in the same mailbag. Life offers no guarantees. As the seasons pass, the town slowly becomes more permanent. Wooden sidewalks replace muddy paths. More businesses appear. A small hotel opens for travelers. The sound of hammers echoes through the streets as new buildings rise. Children born here will one day think of this place not as a frontier settlement, but simply as home. They will hear stories from their parents about arriving when little existed beyond open prairie. To them, those stories will sound almost unbelievable. Every established town begins this way. Not through dramatic events remembered in history books, but through thousands of ordinary decisions made by ordinary people. Someone chooses to stay through one more winter. Someone plants another orchard. Someone opens another shop. Someone teaches another class. Piece by piece, the community grows. Years later, visitors may admire the busy streets without realizing how fragile everything once seemed. Every brick building began as an idea. Every successful business started with uncertainty. Every neighborhood was once empty grass. The frontier was never built by famous names alone. It was built by countless families whose greatest achievement was simply refusing to give up. The American frontier is often imagined as a place untouched by technology. Picture an endless sea of grass, a lone rider on horseback, and a distant cabin standing against the horizon. It is an image that appears in paintings, novels, and films alike. Yet the real frontier was changing almost every year, shaped by inventions that quietly transformed daily life. Not every innovation arrived with great fanfare. Some came in the form of iron rails. Others traveled as thin strands of wire stretching across the landscape. A few were no larger than a simple piece of twisted steel. Together, they changed the West forever. Imagine waking before dawn on a farm in the late 1870s. The first task is to light the stove. Soon afterward comes feeding the chickens, checking the horses, carrying water, and preparing breakfast before the day's labor begins. Life is busy, but it is no longer quite as isolated as it was a decade earlier. Beyond the fields, railroad tracks now connect towns that once depended entirely on wagons. Freight trains arrive carrying tools, fabric, books, medicines, and machinery from factories hundreds of miles away. The railroad does more than transport goods. It transports ideas. Newspapers arrive more regularly. Catalogs introduce products that local merchants have never stocked. Families learn about distant events within days instead of weeks. The world feels just a little smaller. Perhaps the most remarkable invention of the era is one that many people never actually see in action. The telegraph. Along railroad routes, wooden poles march across the countryside carrying wires from town to town. Inside those wires travel electrical signals that move faster than any horse could gallop. For generations, important news had traveled only as fast as a person could carry it. Now, a message that once required weeks could arrive in minutes. For merchants, this is revolutionary. Prices for grain and cattle can be shared across great distances. Railroad stations receive schedules almost instantly. Newspapers print reports from cities hundreds of miles away with astonishing speed. Ordinary families benefit as well. If illness strikes a distant relative, word can reach loved ones far more quickly than before. The telegraph does not eliminate uncertainty, but it shortens it. Not every community has its own telegraph office. In smaller towns, residents visit the station or general store where messages are received. A telegram is treated with a mixture of curiosity and concern. Good news sometimes arrives by telegram. So does tragic news. People learn to recognize the messenger long before reading the envelope. While communication changes, another invention quietly reshapes the land itself. Barbed wire. Before its widespread use, keeping livestock contained on the open plains was an enormous challenge. Wood for fences was scarce across much of the prairie. Stone walls required materials many regions simply did not possess. Farmers and ranchers struggled constantly. Then came a surprisingly simple idea. Twisted strands of wire with sharp barbs placed at regular intervals. It was inexpensive. Easy to transport. Remarkably effective. Within a few years, thousands of miles of fencing appeared across the plains. Fields became easier to protect. Livestock wandered less frequently. Property boundaries became more clearly defined. Yet progress often creates new disagreements. Some cattle ranchers disliked the growing fences, arguing that they blocked traditional grazing routes used for years. Farmers welcomed them as protection for valuable crops. These competing needs occasionally led to conflict, reminding everyone that technology rarely benefits every group in exactly the same way. Inside the home, smaller innovations also improve daily life. Cast iron stoves become more efficient than earlier fireplaces. Cooking requires less fuel. Rooms warm more evenly during winter. Families spend less time battling smoke that once filled poorly ventilated cabins. Sewing machines gradually become more common as well. What once required countless hours of careful hand stitching can now be completed much more quickly. Clothing lasts longer because repairs become easier to make. Curtains, blankets, and children's garments are produced with greater speed. The machine does not eliminate work. It simply changes how the work is done. In the fields, mechanical reapers and improved plows help farmers cultivate larger areas than previous generations could manage. A task that once demanded many hands may now require fewer people and less time. Even so, machines require maintenance. Broken parts must be repaired. Replacement pieces are not always readily available. A clever farmer often becomes something of a mechanic out of necessity. Resourcefulness remains one of the frontier's greatest strengths. Nothing useful is thrown away if it can be repaired. Old wagon wheels become fence gates. Broken harness leather is stitched together again. Glass jars are washed and reused year after year. Iron nails are straightened rather than discarded. Waste is considered a luxury few can afford. As towns continue to grow, another change becomes noticeable. Street lights. Not every community has them, and those that do possess only a handful. Still, a few lamps along the main street allow businesses to remain open a little longer during winter evenings. The glow feels almost magical compared with the darkness that once settled immediately after sunset. Children gather near shop windows to admire displays of goods from distant factories. Travelers arriving after dark can more easily find the hotel or stable. Small improvements gradually reshape ordinary routines. By the early evening, the town grows quiet once more. Storekeepers close their doors. Blacksmiths bank the fires in their forges. Families gather for supper beneath the warm light of kerosene lamps. Someone reads aloud from a newspaper that arrived on yesterday's train. Another family writes a letter to relatives hundreds of miles away. The inventions surrounding them may seem ordinary after only a few years, yet each represents a remarkable achievement. Together they have transformed travel, communication, farming, and everyday life. Progress on the frontier is rarely dramatic. It arrives one railroad, one fence, one telegraph wire, and one improved tool at a time. Most people living through these changes probably do not realize they are witnessing history. To them, they are simply adapting to new opportunities as they appear. Looking back today, we can see something they could not. These quiet innovations helped transform scattered settlements into connected communities and laid the foundation for the modern American West. Long before the sun appears above the prairie, a child is already awake. There is no alarm clock ringing from a bedside table. Instead, the day begins with familiar sounds, the crackling of a wood stove being lit, the quiet footsteps of parents starting their morning chores, and the soft calls of chickens waiting to be fed. For children growing up on the American frontier, childhood looked very different from what many of us imagine today. There were games. There was laughter. There were birthdays, holidays, and moments of wonder. But there was also responsibility. Often, far more responsibility than most children would carry today. Imagine being 10 years old. Before breakfast, you've already carried water from the well, gathered eggs from the chicken coop, and helped bring firewood into the house. None of these tasks seem unusual. They are simply part of daily life. Every member of the family contributes. On a frontier homestead, work isn't divided by age as much as by ability. If you are old enough to help, you help. You learn quickly that small jobs matter. A forgotten gate can allow livestock to wander. A bucket left uncovered may freeze overnight in winter. A carelessly placed lantern could start a fire that destroys everything the family owns. Responsibility arrives early because necessity leaves little choice. Formal education is important, but it often competes with the demands of farm life. Many children attend one-room schoolhouses scattered across the countryside. Some walk several miles each morning. Older brothers and sisters escort younger children when the weather permits. In winter, deep snow or bitter cold may keep everyone at home. Inside the schoolhouse, one teacher instructs students ranging from 6 years old to nearly adulthood. The room buzzes with activity. While younger pupils practice reading aloud, older students solve arithmetic problems on slate boards. Lessons overlap constantly. The teacher moves from desk to desk, offering guidance wherever it is needed. Books are treasured possessions. Many schools own only a handful. Children often share readers, geography texts, and arithmetic books. When a new volume arrives, it is treated with great care. Knowledge is valuable because it opens possibilities beyond the farm. Parents understand this even if they themselves had little opportunity for formal schooling. Writing is practiced carefully. Good handwriting is considered both practical and respectable. Many children spend hours copying passages onto slates before being trusted with ink and paper. Mistakes are expected. Paper is not. Unlike today, where another sheet is easily found, paper represents an expense. Every page matters. School days include more than reading and mathematics. Children memorize poems. Study history. Learn geography. Recite lessons before the entire class. Standing at the front of the room can feel intimidating, yet it builds confidence. Everyone takes a turn. Outside, recess offers welcome freedom. Games require little equipment. A smooth stick becomes a bat. Flat stones become markers. A patch of open ground becomes the world's greatest playground. Imagination supplies whatever toys cannot. Friendships form quickly because classmates often see one another only at school and church. For families living miles apart, these gatherings provide precious opportunities for children to socialize. When lessons end, the workday begins again. A boy may help repair fences or tend livestock. A girl may assist with cooking, sewing, or preserving food. These divisions vary from family to family, and during busy seasons everyone helps wherever needed. Harvest time leaves little room for strict routines. Every capable pair of hands contributes. Despite the workload, children still find moments of adventure. Creeks become places to explore. Prairie flowers are gathered in spring. Wild berries ripen during summer. Simple pleasures carry enormous meaning. The arrival of the first snow often transforms chores into opportunities for play. Sleds fashioned from scrap wood race down gentle hills. Snowballs fly through crisp winter air. Laughter echoes across the fields before everyone returns indoors to warm themselves by the stove. Holidays are celebrated with enthusiasm. Christmas gifts are usually modest. Perhaps a handmade doll. A carved wooden toy. A warm scarf knitted by a grandmother. An illustrated book if the family can afford one. The value lies not in cost but in thoughtfulness. Birthdays are equally simple. A favorite meal. Fresh pie. An evening spent together. On the frontier, time shared with loved ones often means more than expensive presents. Children also learn difficult lessons at an early age. Illness is a familiar visitor. Medical care may require long journeys. Some families lose crops. Others lose livestock. A harsh winter can erase months of hard work. These experiences foster resilience, though they also remind children that life can change unexpectedly. Through it all, parents strive to provide stability. Stories are told around the evening fire. Songs passed down through generations fill the cabin after supper. Grandparents recall journeys across oceans or wagon trails stretching farther west. These stories become part of family history, connecting young listeners to people and places they may never see. Reading aloud remains a cherished tradition. One family member opens a Bible, a newspaper, or perhaps a well-loved novel. Everyone gathers close to hear the words. For a little while, the outside world fades away. The wind may howl beyond the walls, but inside there is warmth, companionship, and shared imagination. As years pass, frontier children grow into frontier adults. The skills learned through necessity become lifelong habits. Patience. Resourcefulness. Cooperation. Hard work. Many will eventually raise children of their own in towns that look very different from the rough settlements where they were born. Roads improve. Schools expand. Communities prosper. Yet they never forget the lessons of those early years. They remember carrying water before sunrise. Walking miles through snow to reach school. Helping neighbors build barns. Watching trains arrive with long-awaited letters and supplies. These memories shape not only individual lives but entire communities. Looking back today, it is easy to admire the courage of pioneers in broad, dramatic terms. Yet perhaps the greatest achievement belonged to the children who quietly adapted to extraordinary circumstances, growing up in a world where every day offered both challenge and possibility. The town is still asleep when the first wagon appears. Its wooden wheels creak softly over the dirt road, and the horses breathe clouds of white into the cool morning air. Behind the driver sits a wagon loaded with sacks of potatoes, baskets of eggs, jars of honey, and several carefully wrapped wheels of homemade cheese. By sunrise, another wagon arrives. Then another. And another. Before long, the quiet settlement has become the busiest place for miles around. For families scattered across the countryside, market day is far more than an opportunity to buy and sell. It is the social event of the week. Imagine standing on the town's main street just after 8 o'clock. The smell of fresh bread drifts from the bakery. Somewhere nearby, a blacksmith's hammer strikes hot iron with a steady rhythm. Children weave between wagons while dogs bark excitedly beneath the feet of strangers. Merchants sweep dust from their storefronts before opening for business. Everywhere you look, people are talking. Neighbors who haven't met in weeks exchange greetings as though no time has passed at all. The frontier may be vast, but today everyone seems to have gathered in one place. The general store is already crowded. Inside, shelves stretch from floor to ceiling. Glass jars filled with candy sit beside barrels of flour. Coffee beans, tea, lamp oil, soap, nails, rope, cooking pots, fabric, and sewing needles all compete for space. The storekeeper knows nearly every customer by name. He remembers who purchased seed last spring. He asks about a sick horse mentioned during the previous visit. He sets aside a special order that finally arrived on yesterday's freight train. In small towns, business is personal. Trust matters almost as much as money. Many purchases are made on credit, especially before harvest. The understanding is simple. If the crops succeed, the debt will be paid. If the harvest fails, everyone must find another solution. Commerce depends on honesty as much as arithmetic. Outside, farmers unload produce from their wagons. Fresh vegetables disappear quickly. Butter wrapped in clean cloth sells before midday. Eggs are counted carefully, then packed into crates for shipment to larger cities. Nothing goes to waste. Even worn tools may find new owners willing to repair them. A skilled trader understands that almost everything has value to someone. Not all business involves money. Bartering remains common. A sack of grain might be exchanged for a new pair of boots. Several chickens may become payment for a wagon repair. A skilled carpenter might build furniture in return for livestock or supplies. Cash is useful, but practical goods often speak just as loudly. Children view market day rather differently. To them, it is an adventure. A visit to the candy jar at the general store is an unforgettable treat. Perhaps there is enough money for a striped peppermint stick or a small bag of roasted peanuts. Such purchases are rare enough to become treasured memories. Some children spend far more time watching than shopping. There is always something fascinating to see. Traveling peddlers occasionally arrive carrying goods unlike anything available locally. One wagon displays polished kitchen utensils. Another offers colorful ribbons, combs, mirrors, and sewing supplies. A third sells books printed in distant cities. People gather around, examining each item with curiosity. News travels with these merchants. Having visited several towns during the previous weeks, they know which bridge washed away after heavy rain. Which county celebrated a successful harvest. Which railroad plans to extend farther west. They carry stories as readily as merchandise. The local newspaper office is equally busy. Fresh editions are stacked near the entrance. Residents eagerly scan headlines describing events from Washington, New York, Chicago, and beyond. National politics feels surprisingly close when yesterday's train delivers today's newspaper. For many, reading the news becomes a shared experience. One customer purchases the paper. Several neighbors gather nearby to discuss its contents. Opinions differ. Conversations grow lively. Yet by evening, everyone is likely to share the same road home. The blacksmith's forge rarely enjoys a quiet moment. Horses require new shoes. Broken wagon wheels demand repair. Bent plow blades are heated until they glow bright orange before being hammered back into shape. The forge radiates warmth even on cold mornings. Sparks leap into the air with every strike of the hammer. The blacksmith's skill keeps the entire community moving. Without strong tools, successful farming becomes nearly impossible. Toward midday, the smell of food fills the street. Women unpack baskets containing warm biscuits, roasted chicken, apple pies, and preserved fruit. Families spread blankets beneath the shade of cottonwood trees whenever they can find them. Meals become picnics. Neighbors who arrived as customers now sit together as friends. Children chase one another through the grass while adults exchange stories about the planting season, rainfall, and hopes for the coming harvest. Laughter drifts across the square. For a few precious hours, work gives way to fellowship. Entertainment occasionally accompanies market day. A fiddler may stand outside the hotel playing lively tunes. Traveling performers sometimes stop in town, drawing cheerful crowds with simple magic tricks, storytelling, or music. These performances require little equipment. A violin. A strong voice. Perhaps a deck of cards. Yet they bring enormous excitement to communities where such spectacles remain uncommon. As afternoon fades, business slows. Wagons that arrived full now depart carrying supplies for the weeks ahead. Barrels of flour. Bundles of cloth. Boxes of nails. New tools. Fresh books. The road leading out of town gradually fills once again. Dust rises behind departing wheels. Storekeepers close their ledgers and count the day's earnings. Children, tired but smiling, lean against sacks of grain as the wagon heads home. The prairie grows quiet once more. Only the tracks left in the dirt remind tomorrow's travelers of today's gathering. Market day has ended. Yet its importance reaches far beyond commerce. It strengthens friendships. Shares knowledge. Builds trust. Connects isolated families to a larger community. On the frontier, buying and selling are only part of the story. The real exchange is something less tangible. Conversation. Encouragement. Shared experience. A reminder that no family is truly alone, even across miles of open country. As the sun sinks below the western horizon, lanterns begin glowing in farmhouse windows one by one. Tomorrow the ordinary work of frontier life resumes. Fields must be tended. Animals must be fed. Repairs must continue. But tonight, many families return home carrying not only supplies but fresh stories to tell around the supper table. And sometimes, those stories become the memories that last a lifetime. Wheat fields ripple beneath warm winds like waves upon an ocean. Summer demands endurance. Hay must be cut before afternoon storms arrive. Livestock require constant attention. Water becomes precious during dry weeks. Families often carry buckets from wells several times each day. Heat settles across the prairie with surprising intensity. Shade is welcomed wherever it can be found. Cottonwood trees become gathering places during brief midday rests. Despite the labor, summer also brings moments of celebration. Community picnics fill nearby meadows. Children splash in shallow creeks. Traveling musicians occasionally pass through town, offering songs and stories that brighten long evenings. The days are busy. The nights are peaceful. Above the prairie stretches a sky filled with countless stars. Without electric lights, the Milky Way appears brighter than many people today have ever seen. Families sit quietly outside after supper, enjoying cool breezes before another early morning begins. Autumn, the great harvest. As August fades into September, attention shifts toward one enormous task. Harvest. Everything accomplished since spring now depends upon these few critical weeks. Fields of wheat glow golden beneath the late summer sun. Corn stands ready. Vegetables fill gardens. Fruit ripens in orchards wherever orchards have been planted. Neighbors often help one another. There is simply too much work for one family alone. Wagons carry grain toward mills. Barns fill with hay. Root cellars gradually receive potatoes, carrots, onions, and turnips that must last through the coming winter. Inside the kitchen, preserving food becomes almost a full-time occupation. Jars of peaches line wooden shelves. Apples are dried. Pickles are prepared. Tomatoes are canned. Every successful harvest means security. Every mistake means hardship. Autumn also brings county fairs. Wheat fields ripple beneath warm winds like waves upon an ocean. Summer demands endurance. Hay must be cut before afternoon storms arrive. Livestock require constant attention. Water becomes precious during dry weeks. Families often carry buckets from wells several times each day. Heat settles across the prairie with surprising intensity. Shade is welcomed wherever it can be found. Cottonwood trees become gathering places during brief midday rests. Despite the labor, summer also brings moments of celebration. Community picnics fill nearby meadows. Children splash in shallow creeks. Traveling musicians occasionally pass through town, offering songs and stories that brighten long evenings. The days are busy. The nights are peaceful. Above the prairie stretches a sky filled with countless stars. Without electric lights, the Milky Way appears brighter than many people today have ever seen. Families sit quietly outside after supper, enjoying cool breezes before another early morning begins. Autumn, the great harvest. As August fades into September, attention shifts toward one enormous task. Harvest. Everything accomplished since spring now depends upon these few critical weeks. Fields of wheat glow golden beneath the late summer sun. Corn stands ready. Vegetables fill gardens. Fruit ripens in orchards wherever orchards have been planted. Neighbors often help one another. There is simply too much work for one family alone. Wagons carry grain toward mills. Barns fill with hay. Root cellars gradually receive potatoes, carrots, onions, and turnips that must last through the coming winter. Inside the kitchen, preserving food becomes almost a full-time occupation. Jars of peaches line wooden shelves. Apples are dried. Pickles are prepared. Tomatoes are canned. Every successful harvest means security. Every mistake means hardship. Autumn also brings county fairs. Livestock competitions draw proud farmers eager to display healthy cattle, horses, sheep, and pigs. Prize ribbons carry honor as much as reward. Children admire homemade quilts, baked goods, and woodworking displayed inside exhibition halls. Music fills the fairgrounds. Laughter mingles with the sounds of animals and conversation. For many families, it is the happiest week of the year. Winter, the true test. Then winter returns. The first snowfall transforms familiar fields into endless white landscapes. Roads disappear beneath drifting snow. Travel becomes difficult. Sometimes impossible. Families rely heavily upon preparations made during autumn. Woodpiles shrink slowly. Pantries are inspected carefully. Every loaf of bread, every preserved vegetable, every smoked piece of meat reflects work completed months earlier. Life moves indoors. Evenings grow longer. After supper, children complete school lessons beside the warmth of the stove. Parents mend clothing. Grandparents tell stories remembered from their own childhoods. Reading aloud becomes a treasured tradition. A single book may be enjoyed many times throughout the season. Games are simple. Checkers. Dominoes. Cards. Riddles. Conversation itself becomes entertainment. Winter also reminds everyone of nature's power. Blizzards may arrive suddenly. Strong winds pile. A poor harvest in autumn made winter harder. A harsh winter delayed spring planting. Nature connected every month to the next. This rhythm shaped not only work but also character. Patience became essential. So did planning. People learned to think months ahead rather than days. The frontier rewarded those who prepared before problems arrived. Looking back today, it is easy to admire the courage of those who settled the American West. But courage alone was never enough. Success belonged to people who adapted, who observed the weather, who cared for their neighbors, who understood that every season, no matter how difficult, would eventually give way to another. The prairie itself taught this lesson year after year. Nothing remained unchanged forever. The snow melted. The fields turned green. The harvest returned. Winter came again. Life continued. Long before the rest of the household wakes, a faint glow appears in the darkness. It isn't the sunrise. It isn't an electric light, those won't become common for many years. It's the warm orange flicker of a fire being coaxed back to life. The person tending it knows that if the stove grows cold, the house will take hours to warm again. Before breakfast can be cooked, before bread can be baked, before coffee can be brewed, the fire must be awake. On the frontier, the hearth is more than a place to cook. It is the center of the home. Imagine stepping inside a modest farmhouse on a winter morning in the 1880s. The air smells faintly of wood smoke, fresh bread, and wool blankets drying near the stove. Outside, frost covers the windows. Inside, the kitchen is already busy. A kettle simmers gently while someone kneads dough on a broad wooden table polished smooth by years of use. Every movement is familiar. Nothing is hurried, but nothing is wasted. A frontier kitchen contains surprisingly few objects compared with a modern one. There are cast iron pots blackened by countless meals. Wooden spoons worn smooth by steady hands. Tin cups hanging from pegs on the wall. A flour bin stands in one corner. Nearby, shelves hold jars of preserved peaches, beans, pickles, and tomatoes prepared during the previous summer. Each jar represents hours of work completed months before. Food storage is an act of planning. Every preserved vegetable is a promise kept to the future. Bread is baked several times each week. The smell fills every room, drawing children toward the kitchen long before breakfast is ready. Butter, churned by hand, waits in a cool cellar. Fresh milk arrives each morning after chores are finished. Simple meals become satisfying because nearly every ingredient has been raised, gathered, or prepared by the family itself. Nothing appears by accident. The table itself tells a story. It is where meals are shared. Letters are written. Children complete arithmetic lessons. Clothing is mended. Seeds are sorted for spring planting. On rainy afternoons, puzzles and games appear where dinner plates rested only hours earlier. One piece of furniture serves a dozen different purposes. Space encourages creativity. Beyond the kitchen lies another busy room. Perhaps someone is weaving cloth. The steady rhythm of the loom echoes softly through the house. Threads of wool or cotton slowly become blankets, towels, or sturdy fabric for clothing. Purchasing every piece of cloth is expensive. Making it at home saves valuable money. Nearby, a spinning wheel hums quietly. The sound is so familiar that few people even notice it anymore. Children grow up surrounded by these gentle rhythms. They learn by watching. A daughter studies how sleeves are sewn. A son observes how broken tools are repaired. Knowledge passes naturally from one generation to the next. No formal lessons are needed. Experience becomes the teacher. One of the most valuable skills on the frontier is sewing. Clothing rarely comes from large department stores. Most garments are made at home or carefully altered until they can no longer be repaired. A worn shirt becomes patches. Those patches eventually become quilt pieces. Even the smallest scraps of fabric find new purpose. Waste is almost unheard of. Quilting becomes both practical work and community tradition. Neighbors gather around large wooden frames stretched tightly with fabric. Needles move steadily as conversation flows just as easily. Stories are exchanged. Advice is offered. Laughter fills the room. By evening, a beautiful quilt has begun to take shape, not simply from cloth, but from shared effort. Some quilts celebrate weddings. Others welcome newborn children. Many become treasured family heirlooms passed from one generation to the next. Every stitch carries a memory. The workshop outside the house is equally important. There, tools hang neatly along rough wooden walls. Planes. Chisels. Hand saws. Hammers. Everything has its place. Furniture is repaired instead of replaced. Broken wagon wheels are carefully rebuilt. A cracked chair receives another season of life through patient craftsmanship. Nothing useful is discarded without careful thought. Resourcefulness becomes second nature. Soap is made from ingredients gathered at home. Candles are poured one by one. Brooms wear down gradually through daily use. Even ashes from the stove may serve another purpose in cleaning or gardening. Modern convenience has not yet arrived. Instead, nearly everything requires skill. Afternoons pass quickly. Children return from school carrying books beneath their arms. Boots are removed near the door. The day's stories spill out almost as quickly as the coats come off. Someone mentions a spelling lesson. Another proudly explains solving a difficult arithmetic problem. Parents listen while preparing the evening meal. Conversation strengthens the family as surely as food strengthens the body. After supper comes a quieter part of the day. The dishes are washed. The table is cleared. The fire is tended once more. Outside, darkness settles across the prairie. Without electric lights, the stars seem astonishingly bright. Inside, a kerosene lamp casts a warm circle across the room. Someone opens a well-loved book. Perhaps it is a collection of stories. Perhaps a newspaper that arrived several days earlier. Perhaps passages from the Bible. Reading aloud transforms a single book into entertainment for the entire family. Children lean closer. Adults pause their sewing or carving to listen. For a little while, the outside world disappears. These evenings create memories that endure long after childhood has passed. Not because they are grand. Because they are shared. As the fire burns lower, tomorrow's work is already waiting. The cows will need milking. The chickens feeding. The fields tending. Life on the frontier is built from ordinary routines repeated day after day. Yet those routines create something extraordinary. A sense of home. Not the house itself. Not the furniture. Not even the land. Home is the feeling created by familiar voices, steady hands, warm meals, and the quiet confidence that whatever tomorrow brings, the family will face it together. Perhaps that is why so many frontier homes, though modest by modern standards, are remembered with such affection in diaries and letters. Their greatest strength was never found in the timber that built them. It lived in the people gathered around the evening fire. Long before highways stretched from coast to coast, before automobiles filled the roads and airplanes crossed the skies, the American frontier was connected by something much simpler. Dirt roads. Wagon trails. Railroad tracks. And the determination of the people who traveled them. Stand beside a country road just after sunrise in the late 1880s. The morning is quiet except for birdsong and the distant rumble of wooden wheels. Soon a freight wagon appears over the hill. The horses pull steadily, their harnesses creaking with every step. Dust rises behind them in soft clouds that drift across the prairie before disappearing into the wind. The driver tips his hat as he passes. He has already been traveling for hours. Ahead lies another town. Beyond that, another journey. For many people, travel is not an adventure. It is simply part of earning a living. Merchants carry goods from growing cities into small frontier communities. Farmers haul grain to the nearest railroad depot. Doctors ride for miles to visit patients scattered across the countryside. Teachers relocate to schools in newly established settlements. Mail carriers make their regular rounds regardless of rain, heat, or snow. Every traveler plays a small role in connecting distant communities. Roads are rarely smooth. Spring rains leave deep ruts that challenge even the strongest wagons. Summer dust settles over everything. Autumn storms can wash away bridges. Winter snow hides familiar landmarks beneath blankets of white. A journey that takes 1 day in July might require 3 in January. Patience is part of every trip. Imagine spending an entire day seated atop a wagon. The pace is unhurried. The horses decide much of the schedule. Occasionally the driver stops beside a creek to let them drink. Lunch is simple. Cold biscuits. Salted meat. Perhaps an apple saved from the previous harvest. Meals are eaten wherever the road allows. There are no roadside restaurants. Only open country stretching toward the horizon. Travelers become skilled observers. They notice approaching weather long before the first raindrop falls. Dark clouds gathering in the west may signal an afternoon thunderstorm. A sudden change in wind often means colder temperatures are coming. Nature provides constant information for those willing to pay attention. The railroad changes everything. Where wagon travel depends on weather and road conditions, trains offer remarkable speed and reliability. A journey that once required weeks can now be completed in days. Stations become centers of activity. Each arriving locomotive brings passengers, freight, newspapers, letters, and news from places many residents have never visited. Children often gather to watch the trains arrive. The enormous engines seem almost alive. Steam escapes with a loud hiss. Metal wheels grind against the rails. Conductors call out destinations. Porters unload crates of merchandise destined for nearby stores. The platform becomes a place of excitement and possibility. Not everyone traveling west plans to stay. Salesmen move from town to town carrying sample cases filled with fabrics, tools, books, medicines, or household goods. Their livelihood depends on constant movement. Each evening they seek a room at the local hotel before continuing the next morning. Some become familiar faces despite never settling permanently. Immigrant families arrive with hopes that stretch far beyond the luggage they carry. Many speak little English upon arrival. Yet they bring valuable skills. Carpenters. Bakers. Stone masons. Blacksmiths. Farmers. Communities grow stronger because newcomers contribute traditions, recipes, craftsmanship, and ideas from around the world. Travel also carries entertainers. A traveling theater company may arrive unexpectedly, transforming the town hall into a stage for one unforgettable evening. Musicians perform lively dances. Magicians amaze children with clever illusions. Lecturers share stories about distant places. For isolated communities, these visits provide welcome excitement. The audience remembers them long after the performers continue down the road. Hotels become crossroads of conversation. Guests gather around the dining table each evening. One traveler speaks of bustling Chicago. Another describes mining camps in Colorado. Someone else has crossed the Mississippi River only days before. Stories flow as freely as coffee. News spreads from person to person, often reaching small towns before newspapers do. The hotel keeper hears everything. By morning, much of the town has heard it too. Stagecoaches still serve many regions beyond the reach of railroads. Though less comfortable than trains, they remain essential. Passengers squeeze together on narrow seats. Every bump reminds them that suspension systems are still quite simple. Yet complaints rarely last long. Everyone understands that reaching the destination matters more than traveling comfortably. Riverboats continue carrying freight where waterways permit. Great rivers remain natural highways linking farms and towns to larger markets. Warehouses along riverbanks fill with grain, timber, and livestock awaiting shipment. Commerce follows every available route. Travel is not always easy. Broken wagon wheels delay entire journeys. Flooded creeks force long detours. Illness sometimes interrupts carefully planned schedules. Yet frontier travelers develop remarkable flexibility. If one road becomes impassable, another is found. If a bridge washes away, neighbors gather to rebuild it. Problems are expected. Solutions become part of everyday life. As the years pass, journeys become slightly shorter. Roads improve. Railroad lines expand. Bridges grow stronger. Telegraph lines follow the tracks. Distance slowly loses some of its power. Places that once felt impossibly remote begin to seem connected. Families separated by hundreds of miles exchange letters more frequently. Merchants receive supplies with greater regularity. Doctors obtain newer medicines. Schools acquire more books. Every improvement strengthens the communities scattered across the frontier. By sunset, the last train of the day whistles as it disappears toward the western horizon. Its smoke fades into the evening sky. Inside its passenger cars, strangers sit beside one another, each carrying a different dream. Some travel toward opportunity. Some return home. Others simply follow the next chapter of their lives wherever the rails may lead. The tracks themselves remain behind, silent beneath the stars. Yet they continue to bind together towns, farms, and families across an enormous continent. The American frontier has never truly been isolated. It has always been connected, by roads, by rivers, by railroads, and above all by the people willing to travel them. When history remembers the American frontier, it often remembers the loudest stories. The gold rushes. The cattle drives. The railroad builders. The famous outlaws. The legendary lawmen. Yet most frontier towns did not survive because of extraordinary heroes. They survived because ordinary people showed up every morning and quietly did their jobs. Imagine walking down the main street of a small frontier town just after sunrise. The boardwalk is still damp from the night's dew. A shopkeeper unlocks the front door of the general store. Across the street, smoke curls from the chimney of the bakery. Farther down the road, the rhythmic ring of a blacksmith's hammer echoes through the cool morning air. The town is waking. Each person has a role. Each role matters. The blacksmith is often one of the busiest people in town. Almost everything made of iron eventually finds its way into the forge. Horseshoes wear thin. Plows strike hidden rocks. Wagon axles crack after miles of rough travel. Broken hinges. Bent nails. Loose chains. The list never seems to end. The blacksmith knows that a small repair today can prevent a much larger problem tomorrow. His workshop is warm even during winter. The glowing coals throw orange light across the walls while sparks dance upward each time the hammer meets hot metal. The work is loud. Hot. Demanding. But absolutely essential. A few buildings away stands the doctor's office. Medical knowledge in the late 19th century is advancing, yet many challenges remain. Doctors travel constantly. Some ride horseback for hours to reach isolated farms. Others are called in the middle of the night during storms. Their bags contain simple instruments, medicines, bandages, and hope. Not every illness can be cured. Not every injury can be healed. Still, the presence of a trusted physician brings reassurance to families facing uncertain times. Nearby, the teacher arrives before the students. Reputation is earned slowly. Lost quickly. The hotel keeper meets nearly everyone passing through town. Traveling salesmen. Railroad workers. Families searching for new opportunities. Teachers beginning new assignments. Immigrants arriving with hopeful expectations. Each guest brings fresh stories from distant places. Evenings in the dining room become lively exchanges of news and experience. The hotel serves not only meals and beds but also conversation. The minister occupies yet another important place within the community. His work extends beyond Sunday services. He visits the sick, comforts grieving families, performs weddings, welcomes newborn children through baptism, offers counsel during disagreements. The church building often hosts community meetings, holiday celebrations, and charitable gatherings in addition to worship. It stands as a reminder that towns require both practical labor and shared values. Even occupations that receive little public attention prove indispensable. The seamstress repairs worn clothing until it appears almost new. The carpenter builds furniture sturdy enough to last decades. The miller transforms grain into flour. The postmaster sorts letters that connect families separated by hundreds of miles. Each task may seem ordinary. Together, they create extraordinary stability. Children notice these occupations long before they understand them fully. A young boy watches the blacksmith shape glowing iron. A little girl admires the teacher's careful handwriting. Another child studies the photographer's mysterious camera. Without realizing it, they begin imagining their own futures. Some will remain in town. Others will travel elsewhere. But each carries lessons learned from the adults working quietly around them. As years pass, these familiar faces become part of the town's identity. New families arrive. Older residents retire. Buildings change. Roads improve. Yet the spirit of the community remains rooted in everyday service. Looking back, historians often search for dramatic turning points. Great battles. Important speeches. Historic discoveries. Those moments certainly matter. But communities are rarely built through dramatic events alone. They are built by teachers opening classroom doors every morning. Doctors answering late-night calls. Blacksmiths repairing broken tools. Storekeepers extending credit to struggling neighbors. Postmasters delivering letters filled with hope. Ordinary work repeated faithfully over many years becomes something remarkable. It becomes the foundation upon which entire towns are built. As evening settles over the frontier once again, lamps begin glowing in windows along the main street. The day's work is finished. Tomorrow morning, nearly everyone will return to do it all again. Not because history is watching, but because their neighbors depend on them. When people imagine the American frontier, they often picture beginnings. The first wagon crossing an open prairie. The first cabin standing alone beneath an endless sky. The first furrow cut into untouched soil. Those moments certainly mattered. But beginnings are only half the story. The greater achievement was what came afterward. Imagine returning to the same town 20 years later. The dirt road you once followed from the railroad station is now wider and better maintained. Young trees planted beside the streets have grown tall enough to cast afternoon shade. Wooden buildings that look temporary now stand beside brick storefronts built with the confidence of people who believe they are here to stay. The town no longer feels like an experiment. It feels like home. Children who once ran barefoot through muddy streets are now adults raising families of their own. Some have become teachers. Others run shops or practice medicine. A few have inherited the farms their parents struggled to establish. The generation that remembers the earliest days is growing older. They still tell stories of the first winters, when every snowfall seemed uncertain and every harvest felt like a test. To younger listeners, those stories sound almost unbelievable. It is difficult to imagine a time when the school did not exist. When the church was only a meeting beneath the open sky. When the main street was little more than wagon tracks across the grass. Yet every community begins that way. One decision at a time. One family at a time. As prosperity slowly grows, daily life changes in small but meaningful ways. Homes become larger. Glass windows replace simple shutters. Libraries appear in some towns. Music lessons become possible for children whose grandparents spent their youth worrying more about surviving winter than learning the piano. The pace of life remains demanding, but opportunities expand. New businesses arrive almost every year. A pharmacist opens a shop. A bank offers loans to growing families. A newspaper increases its circulation. A photographer captures weddings, graduations, and family reunions that would have seemed impossible only a generation earlier. Progress is rarely dramatic. Instead, it arrives quietly. One improvement this year. Another the next. The people living through these changes often hardly notice them. Only years later does the difference become clear. The railroad continues bringing new arrivals. Some come from neighboring states. Others arrive from distant countries carrying languages, customs, and recipes that enrich the growing community. A bakery begins selling dark rye bread inspired by European traditions. A carpenter introduces techniques learned overseas. Children grow up hearing several languages spoken along the same street. The frontier becomes not just a place of settlement, but a meeting place of cultures. This diversity strengthens the town in unexpected ways. Different experiences produce different ideas. Farmers share new methods of growing crops. Craftsmen exchange techniques. Families introduce one another to unfamiliar holidays and traditions. Though disagreements sometimes arise, cooperation remains essential. The challenges of frontier life leave little room for lasting division. Neighbors still rely upon neighbors. Nature continues to remind everyone of that truth. One difficult season can humble even the most successful family. A drought may reduce harvests. A powerful storm may damage homes and barns. Grasshoppers may descend upon fields in astonishing numbers. Yet experience has taught the community something valuable. Hardship is easier to bear together. When one family struggles, others often arrive with food, tools, or extra hands. These acts rarely make newspaper headlines. They become part of everyday life. The children growing up here see generosity modeled again and again. Without realizing it, they learn that strong communities are built through ordinary kindness. Time moves steadily forward. The frontier itself slowly changes. Territories become states. Railroad maps grow more detailed. Roads improve. Telegraph lines multiply. In some places, electricity begins to appear. Technologies that once seemed astonishing gradually become familiar. Yet beneath all these changes, the character of the people remains recognizable. They still value hard work. They still gather for harvest festivals and county fairs. Families continue meeting after church to exchange news. Friends still visit one another without formal invitations. The habits formed during the earliest years remain woven into daily life. Visitors arriving from larger eastern cities sometimes remark upon the friendliness of these communities. People greet strangers by name after only a brief introduction. Shopkeepers remember customers from months before. Children wave to passing wagons. Hospitality is not considered unusual. It is expected. Life has taught everyone that today's stranger may become tomorrow's neighbor. As evening falls, lanterns glow behind windows across the town. Some families gather around supper tables much as they always have. Others read newspapers describing inventions and events taking place far beyond the prairie. Young people dream about futures their grandparents could scarcely have imagined. The world is changing quickly. Yet the lessons learned here remain timeless. Patience. Perseverance. Resourcefulness. Cooperation. Hope. These qualities help transform open grassland into thriving communities. Not through sudden miracles. Not through extraordinary luck. but through thousands of ordinary decisions repeated over many years. The greatest legacy of the frontier is not found only in the buildings that still stand or the railroads that continue crossing the plains. It lives in the values carried forward by the families who called these places home. Their stories remind us that history is often written quietly. One sunrise. One harvest. One helping hand at a time. The day is ending. The sun settles slowly beneath the western horizon, painting the prairie in shades of gold, amber, and deep violet. The long grass sways gently in the evening breeze, just as it has for thousands of years. A single lantern glows in the window of a farmhouse. Then another. And another. From a distance, each small light seems insignificant. Together, they tell the story of an entire nation. Over the course of this journey, we've traveled along dusty wagon roads, waited beside lonely railroad platforms, stepped into one-room schoolhouses, wandered through bustling market days, and sat quietly around kitchen tables where ordinary families ended long days of hard work. We've met blacksmiths, teachers, doctors, merchants, photographers, and children whose names history rarely remembers. Yet their lives mattered. Without them, the American frontier would never have become more than a scattering of temporary settlements. History often celebrates dramatic moments. The signing of treaties. The opening of railroads. The discovery of gold. The election of presidents. But the true foundation of any community is built in quieter ways. It is built every morning when someone opens a shop before sunrise. Every afternoon when a teacher patiently explains another lesson. Every evening when neighbors stop to help repair a damaged fence without expecting payment. The frontier was not conquered in a single generation. It was cultivated. Patiently. Season after season. Year after year. Imagine standing once more on that same stretch of prairie where our story began. Many decades have passed. The cabin that once stood alone is now surrounded by fields, roads, and neighboring farms. Children who once chased butterflies through tall grass are now grandparents watching new generations play beneath the same wide sky. The prairie itself remembers. Though roads have changed and towns have grown, the wind still moves across the grass much as it always has. Morning still arrives with birdsong. Winter still tests preparation. Spring still rewards patience. Nature continues its timeless rhythm regardless of human ambition. That may be one of the frontier's greatest lessons. People learned they could never completely control the land. Instead, they learned to understand it. To respect it. To adapt alongside it. This spirit of adaptation shaped more than farming. It shaped character. When crops failed, families planted again. When storms destroyed barns, neighbors rebuilt them. When illness visited, communities gathered to help. When new immigrants arrived speaking unfamiliar languages, many towns gradually found ways to welcome new traditions alongside old ones. Progress was rarely perfect. Disagreements existed. Hardships were real. Not every dream succeeded. Not every settlement survived. Some towns disappeared almost as quickly as they appeared. Others struggled through years of uncertainty before finding stability. History, like life itself, is rarely simple. Yet across all those different experiences, one pattern appears again and again. People endured because they endured together. The frontier rewarded cooperation more often than individual heroics. A harvest required many hands. A barn raising depended upon willing neighbors. A school survived because parents believed education mattered. A church flourished because families gathered each week despite long journeys and difficult weather. Community became the strongest tool anyone possessed. Many of the inventions we explored, the railroad, the telegraph, improved farming equipment, made life easier. But none of them replaced trust. No machine could substitute for a neighbor arriving with a wagon after a storm. No technology could replace kindness freely offered. Perhaps that is why so many frontier diaries spend less time describing famous events than describing ordinary people. The woman who shared seeds after a difficult spring. The doctor who rode through a snowstorm. The blacksmith who repaired a plow before planting season without asking immediate payment. The teacher who kept the school open despite harsh winters. These acts rarely attracted public attention. Yet together they created communities worth remembering. Today, many of the old frontier towns continue to exist. Some have grown into busy cities. Others remain quiet farming communities where historic buildings still line the main street. Visitors may admire the architecture or museums. But the greatest legacy cannot always be seen. It lives in family stories passed from one generation to the next. A grandfather recalling his first harvest. A grandmother describing evenings spent reading beside a kerosene lamp. Parents teaching children the value of honest work, careful planning, and helping neighbors in difficult times. These lessons travel farther than any railroad ever could. As we look back from the 21st century, modern life often seems to move at astonishing speed. Messages travel around the world in seconds. Journeys that once required weeks now take hours. Many of the daily challenges faced by frontier families have disappeared. Yet their experiences still speak to us. They remind us that meaningful work takes time. That strong communities are built through countless small acts of cooperation. That resilience is rarely dramatic. More often, it is simply the decision to begin again tomorrow. Perhaps that is why the frontier continues to capture our imagination. Not because it was easy. Not because it was perfect. But because ordinary people faced extraordinary uncertainty with remarkable determination. They planted trees whose shade they might never enjoy. They built schools for children not yet born. They laid foundations for communities they hoped would outlast them. In doing so, they left behind something more valuable than buildings or roads. They left an example. As the final lantern is extinguished and the prairie settles into silence, the stars appear one by one overhead. The same stars watched over wagon trains crossing endless grasslands. They shone above lonely homesteads, bustling railroad towns, and families gathered around evening fires. Generations have looked upward and found comfort in that familiar sky. Though the world below has changed beyond recognition, the stars remain. Perhaps that is a fitting way to end our journey. History is not only the story of famous names or extraordinary events. It is also the story of millions of ordinary lives, each contributing a small light to something far greater than themselves. Thank you for joining me on this journey across the American frontier. I hope these stories have brought the past a little closer, reminding us that behind every historic photograph, every weathered cabin, and every quiet country road were real people, people who laughed, worried, hoped, failed, succeeded, and built lives with courage and persistence. And if you ever find yourself standing beneath a wide-open sky at sunset, watching the last light fade across the fields, perhaps you'll remember them for a moment. Not as legends, but as neighbors from another time. Their journey may have ended long ago. Its lessons have not.